I'm Leslie Chapman, Distinguished Engineer with Comcast in beautiful downtown Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've been in the industry for 20 years and with Comcast for the last 15. For many of these 15 years, I worked on developing the interactive guides that our Comcast customers use when they interact with their cable box via the remote. I was one of the lead developers for the X1 platform that currently serves over 35 million customers. And now I'm on a team that delivers the Xfinity mobile application. But we'll get into that a little bit later. As a distinguished engineer, a really big part of my role is to observe our processes and systems in order to make recommendations on how we can improve them to make my fellow engineers' work easier and more enjoyable, as well as helping to improve our product's quality. Today, I'm going to talk about how I used GitHub tools to derive metrics around our pull request and code review processes in order to improve them by proving that we had some problems. Another big part of my role is mentoring. Mentoring takes a lot of different forms, and every relationship is different, and every mentee has different goals. But one thing that mentees often have in common is a desire to get a great year-end review with an eye towards a promotion. In the second half of my talk today, we're going to chat about how I often encourage engineers to use GitHub metrics to bolster their year-end review. So as promised, a little bit more about the team I'm on and what we build. I'm on the team that builds Comcast's Xfinity app. This is a mobile application available on both Android and iOS that allows our customers to do things like check their internet health, monitor their home security cameras, purchase new equipment, and do other fun things like pause Wi-Fi for their children during dinner time. We have a 2-week release cycle and create our release branch on Friday every other week. We have a lot of different teams. We call them squads. They operate similarly, but they have the autonomy to do what's best for the way their squad works. So some teams were imposing what we might call an early code freeze, the Tuesday or Wednesday of release week ahead of the branch being cut on Friday. Other teams just got right down to the wire. A little bit more about our process. When developers are ready to merge, they raise a pull request. And then they link to that pull request in one of our code review Slack channels. We have one for Android and one for iOS. The idea being that it gives visibility of the changes to the entire larger team, not just the smaller squad. And it helps to crowdsource reviewers to get those pull requests through in a timely manner. When I first joined this team, about 1.5 years ago, part of how I got to know the code was to monitor these Slack channels. Some people would just paste the PR link, while others would paste it along with some commentary around the changes and what to look out for when doing the review. And then once people +1'd the PR, they would usually reply back in the Slack channel with a little done emoji or approved emoji. So I monitored both the Android and iOS channels, but coming from a Java background, I'll admit that I was keeping a bit of a closer eye on the Android side of things. One thing that jumped out at me right away was that our Android repository was only requiring a +1 in GitHub. I immediately raised this as a red flag, and I was told that, well, yeah, even though we're only enforcing a +1 in GitHub, that it's word of mouth that we actually require a +2. Okay, that sounded really fishy to me, but let's move on. So as I got to know the team, the other thing I did was just talk to people, engineers at all levels, from junior to very senior, to see what they liked and didn't like about our current processes. Some of the feedback that I heard from the junior engineers was that people weren't adding enough comments in the reviews, neither the submitter nor the approver. Okay, and I thought back to the Slack channel and realized, well, some people were at least adding a lot of context in the Slack channel, but shouldn't that belong in the PR? Moving on. Another piece of feedback from some of the junior engineers was that they didn't feel like they had the time to review the pull requests because they were getting approved so quickly that the other engineers just couldn't grok it in time. Wow, that sounds like it's happening too fast, huh? The next piece of feedback was that people felt like it was just a mad dash to get their PRs approved the day before a release branch was cut. And the final, kind of most controversial piece of feedback that I heard was around this whole in the squad versus not in the squad for reviews. Some people felt very strongly that reviews should only be completed by people within the squad, since they're the subject matter experts and they're the ones that are going to continue to maintain and support this code. While other people felt very strongly that it was important for people outside of the squad to be doing reviews, to get fresh eyes on the code and understand what another squad might be doing that could impact your feature work. So now I was left with all of this conjecture. But as you know, we're engineers. We're not going to change our systems and processes because of conjecture. I needed data to back up all of these theories and gut feelings. Thankfully, GitHub has a suite of APIs. They are really well documented and easy to use. I had some questions that I wanted answered. Are people really getting a +2 in our Android repo, or are they merging with a +1 since the tooling allows for it? How long is the average review really open for? Are we merging a lot more on the day before we create our release branch? How many comments are we leaving in our reviews? So I got to work digging into the GitHub API to try to answer these questions. I was able to walk the list of commits in each of the repos I was interested in and take a delta between the time the pull request was raised and when the merge occurred, thus giving me insights into how long items were up for review. By looking at the timestamp on when items were merged, I was able to see what day of the week we were merging most of our commits. And then I was also able to look at if the delta between raising the pull request and the merge shrank on certain days of the week. For each commit, I was also able to walk the list of comments to see how many comments were in an average pull request. Okay, no script is perfect, so let's talk about some of the caveats. This didn't give me an insight into how long people were spending actually doing the review, eyes on code, just how long a pull request sat in the review state prior to merge. And since this was just a small experiment, I also did not subtract for normal working hours for various reasons, including we have developers in different time zones, wildly different time zones even. We have developers in Italy, both sides of the US, and also that developers work different office hours, especially in our predominantly work from home atmosphere. Some folks might start at 7 a.m., while others might not start until 9 a.m. So realistically, what this means is that if a PR was raised at 5 p.m. Eastern Time and merged the next morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, my metrics would show that that review was open for 16 hours, when really it might have only had eyes on it for 5 minutes. But at least I was aware of this caveat. Another caveat that might have been specific to my team was for cherry picks. In our team, cherry picks usually take very little time and require less scrutiny on review. So I knew that this might skew the results in terms of them having less comments and taking less time. But again, at least I knew that these were the caveats to the data that I was mining. Now, on a sad side, I found that I was unable to get the number of reviewers that approved the request per PR. To be fair, maybe I just didn't find the right API docs, but I did find other people looking for the same data that were also unable to find it. So basically, Stack Overflow confirmed that it wasn't in the API at the time I was using it. Okay, let's get back to the good news. I was able to determine that the vast majority of our pull requests were merged within 24 hours of being raised, but very few took under 30 minutes. So overall, this seemed pretty healthy. We were getting things closed in a timely manner, but the data didn't appear to show that we were just rubber stamping the reviews. Cool. Next up, the day of the week. Whoa. We had a spike on Thursdays before the release branch was being cut. A significant spike, like 40% of our merges. This was not a pretty picture. And when I looked at the delta of the closure times on those Thursdays, we skewed dangerously close to getting most of them reviewed in under an hour. And that just did not smell right to me. Finally, the comments, or should I say what comments? We were averaging 2 to 3 comments per pull request, keeping in mind the skew for cherry picks, which rarely have comments. So we needed to address that. All right, great. I have all this data. Now what? Well, the first thing was updating our Android repo to require a +2. That was a no-brainer. I couldn't prove through data that people weren't adhering to the word of mouth knowledge of getting a +2, but better safe than sorry. And armed with the data that we were clearly not doing our due diligence at the end of our release cycle, we made some meaningful changes in terms of our culture. All of the squads were encouraged to observe a soft code freeze earlier in the week. And we also made sure to socialize with all of the developers that it's more important that we adhere to our policies around quality than try to get something in at the last minute. With our 2-week release cycle, it's not like it will take forever to catch the next release vehicle. And finally, back to the feedback. I had heard about whether we should be getting reviews from inside the squad versus outside of the squad. We started to use Git's code owners files. So if you're not familiar with code owners, let me try to break it down real quick. When you create a file named code owners and commit it to the base of a directory, or when you commit it to the base of a repository, it allows for rules to be made about who must review a pull request. For example, I could say that for a certain repository, there is a list of people, and at least one out of that list of people is required to approve the PR. Another +1 could come from anywhere. And you can even use a granularity of different packages within the repository. So let's say for package X, Jane must give a +1, but for package Y, John must give a +1. So this way, we can ensure that an SME, or subject matter expert, gave a +1 for a given feature, still leaving the door open for anyone that's not in that approver list to give the other +1. This way, both sides of that headbutting one, both the people that thought the review needed to come from within the squad, and also the people that thought that everyone should be able to look at the review. So now we had the data, we had a plan, and the best part is that I can rerun these same scripts in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, and see if we've made meaningful progress towards bettering our processes. So that was my example of using the power of Git to quantify a problem, using Git tools to put a solution in place, and how we will continue to use Git to track our progress. So now I'd like to pivot, because I promised I wouldn't only talk about using Git to better the team, but also Git as a tool for personal and career growth. Many years ago, I had a coworker I was very close to who had been wanting a promotion for quite some time. But he seemed to be stuck in his current position, despite being a brilliant developer and a great teammate. One day, during our end-of-year review cycle, he stopped by my desk to ask if I wanted to grab lunch. I was typing furiously into a Word doc that already had about 2 pages full of text, and I told him that I couldn't go to lunch because I was in the middle of typing up my end-of-year self-assessment. He replied to me that he usually just checks the boxes in our end-of-year review tool and doesn't bother with the optional comments sections. I stopped dead in my tracks. I said, "What? Are you serious?" Needless to say, I sat him down and I explained the following. 1, I can barely remember what I did in January of this year. And I only need to remember for myself. So there's very little chance your manager, who has a dozen or more employees, will have committed to memory what you did in January. So it's your job to remind them. Number 2, I get it. It feels gross to brag about how awesome you are, but nobody else is going to do it for you. The fact is, not everyone on the team is going to get a promotion, and your best shot at getting it is to tell your story about why you deserve it. That means bragging. And third and final, while it's great to talk about the things that you've done that are over and above your current job description, the baseline is to prove that you're indeed doing your current job description. For most of us engineers, that baseline is write code, review code, raise issues when you see them. Pretty simple stuff, right? Once again, Git to the rescue. So, all you have to do is go into your GitHub instance, click on your icon on the upper right corner, and select your profile. And you can see all sorts of insights into your contributions year over year. How many code reviews have you completed? How many commits? And to what repositories? How many pull requests have you raised? And how many issues have you raised? There's even historical data there so that you can see if you're doing more or less than previous years. And you can see how you fare in relation to the other contributors in that repository. Knowing this data not only allows you to show off to your manager that you might have been top contributor for the year, but it also allows you to get ahead of your narrative on why you might not have been. For example, were you on paternal leave this year? then your commits are probably going to be less than in previous years, and that's okay. Or if you're like me and you don't actually work on production-facing code very often, I work on a lot of proof of concepts, then you might not have a lot of commits. And of course, more code doesn't mean you're better or worse than your teammates. It's not about comparing lines of code. Somebody might have more commits because they keep creating more bugs, not because they're creating more awesome features. The key about using this data is to know how to control your own story. Because guess what? Your manager can see this data too. A quick aside, a few years after that incident, my manager gave me some feedback that he was tired of reading several pages of my year-end review. So maybe don't go as overboard as I did. But I encourage everyone to take a look at all of the tools that you use and see what insights you can gain and harness in your year-end review. For example, ticketing systems like Jira also provide dashboards on users, and you can use those to see where you're spending your time and show a view of your throughput. And if I might offer this final piece of advice, write everything down, whether it's in your commit, in your pull request, or even on a Post-it note that you keep all year. Take notes all year of all of your accomplishments, because I can tell you that if it weren't for my notes, I wouldn't be able to tell you what I did last week. And I can assure you that one of the things I'm taking note of today is being here talking with all of you. So I really hope you enjoyed it, because I certainly did. Thank you.
And we're back. And we're live with Leslie Chapman. Leslie, it's so good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Dwayne. How are you?
Doing excellent. Thanks so much for being here. One of the more compelling stories I've maybe ever heard about using underlying data, maybe ever. I mean, it's so personal, especially there at the end. But we got a ton of questions out in Discord while your talk was going on. So I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. So and then we can catch up maybe after. So a 2-week release cadence is pretty aggressive for an app used by a lot of non-technical folks. Was it hard to get into this cadence, or was that already in place when you joined?
So it was already in place when I joined, but I will tell you this. I've been with Comcast for a long time, but as I said, only with this team for about 1.5 years. And before I joined this team, my previous team at Comcast had a 1-month release cycle. And we did go through the experience on that team of moving the 1 month to 2 week. And it is a very big culture shift. We tend to do Scrum with story pointing, and you have to just kind of change your mindset on how you break problems up into smaller and smaller pieces. And as I alluded to, the other thing is, as engineers, we want to ship things, right? That's why we get into this. And you have to get better at like missing the train, because it's okay. There's another one coming. Like it's just not realistic to think everything gets done in 2 weeks. But it's great on the other hand, because the team I was on, where it was a month, it's the exact opposite. There really is this feeling of, I have to get it done. I have to, because otherwise it's an entire month. And that team was actually the team that built the platform for television. And that was really a big deal, because if you needed to write a feature for the Super Bowl and you missed your February release, it's kind of a big deal.
I'd say so. All right. Thank you very much for that. Moving right along. Again, we got a number of questions here. How to make and receive constructive reviews for your team, peer reviews, guidance for young devs and teams, like tips and reviewee for reviewer, how to seek improvement, in your code from seniors while being respectful of their time? That's from Steffi out on the Discord.
Sure. One of the things that we do that I think is really great is we actually make use of the PR template, which gets a lot of the busy work and minutia out of the way and sets you up for a constructive review in the first place. And it's boilerplate, but it's the boilerplate sometimes people forget that's really important. Why are you making this change? So in our case, that would be linking back to a Jira ticket because we don't make any changes without a ticket. So link me directly to that Jira ticket so that I understand, was it a feature? Was it a bug? If it was a bug, there's the ticket that explains what the bug was. If it's a feature, here's more info. So that's number one in the PR template. Screenshots of if you did add a new feature, just give me screenshots right next to it. What else? Oh, calling out whether you added unit testing or not and what your unit test targeted. So the PR template really helps to put that human narrative next to your code. So that you get to read all of this, why I did it, here's what it looks like, here's what I did to validate it. And now you're really stepping into the code with so much more knowledge that it's quicker for you to do the review, probably less questions. So that's just great for everyone. The other thing that we've tried to do is to really encourage people to put comments in line with their code in the PR. And then, of course, that opens up the bag of worms of like, well, if I have a comment to make on this line of code, why didn't I actually put the comment in the code? But that's like an entire discussion for a different day. At the very least, put it in the PR. Yeah, but that's what we try to do. And the other thing that we do culturally is to try always to keep it respectful. You definitely don't want to create a culture where people feel intimidated or insulted when, and sometimes it's just as easy as like, you know, if there's a line of code and I don't understand what's going on, or maybe I even have an inkling that it's wrong. There's a big difference between using words like, hey, can you explain a little more what you did here versus this doesn't look right. So being mindful and creating a culture where we just use kinder words and encourage communication.
Right on. One of the announcements we're making later is about bonus content. Eric Adomio is giving a talk on Git Lens as part of that bonus. And that's literally one of the reasons he made Git Lens at that point you made earlier. People not putting comments in line, but they'll put them in the PR. They'll put them in the commit message. He needed a way to like show those. And that's one of the points of Git Lens. But that's just something easier for folks to, you know, to watch out for later. We will bring that up.
I will be there.
That's the closing remarks. We'll be unveiling where those are. Okay. Next up. Okay. How hard did you find it to change the development culture? Where so many seem resistant to change these days. Well, just in general, I guess. But thanks, Josie.
That is always so hard, right? Like we all get stuck in our ways. I tend to think, especially as engineers, I know I am. I have certain very rigid ways of doing things, not just at work, but even around the house. I have a method by which I vacuum the house. And I always vacuum the kitchen first. I can't vacuum the basement first. That would be lunacy. So, you know, we have to, first of all, admit that to ourselves, that change is hard. One of the things that I didn't mention, though, is sometimes the best way to get people to change is to remind them they're the ones that asked for the change. So at the same time that I was pulling all these metrics from Git to try to prove that we had some things going wrong, the other side of what I did was I actually sent out an ENPS or Net Promoter Score style survey to the engineers to ask them for their opinions of how things are going. And And just like I said about the scripts, I kept that. And I actually pulled out comments. They were anonymous, but I pulled out themes from those comments. And we were then able to go and discuss as a team the various themes around, I don't feel like there are enough comments here, because that's a cultural thing. I can't enforce people putting comments, but if we have a whole bunch of people in the room that are all saying, I want this, now people might be more open to it, and we can again go back, send out those same NPS surveys, and just get a gut feel on if, are we doing better as a team? Do we have the same complaint? The other thing that I like to do is for the folks on the team, and again, it is often sometimes the junior engineers that have more of the like, I need more comments here, I need more context. We try to set up like a buddy system so that if a junior engineer doesn't feel comfortable saying to a more experienced engineer, hey, can you add some more comments? Then I, as that person's senior buddy, can either make that comment on their behalf or just give them that extra push to say like, hey, I want you to flex these muscles. I want you to make that comment, but then I'm going to come in 2 seconds later and back you up. So whichever way makes them feel more comfortable. But I do think having, like, I wouldn't call it mentorship, but having an ally or a buddy to give voice to the folks whose voices don't always feel heard helps to change culture in significant ways.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That actually makes me want to ask a question. As you're bringing new people into the team, especially people that might not have been used to working in an actually agile system before, I've heard a lot of people say, I never actually did agile. We just did waterfall really fast. How are you onboarding new folks to like the way that things are done and getting them used to like this idea of self-assessment?
A big part is, again, the buddy, having someone to walk you through. And I mean, I say the word buddy because, again, I do think it's very different than a mentor. We're really big on mentorship, though, also. Just creating safe spaces for employees, especially our new hires, to ask the questions. It's really hard to admit you don't know something. So to actually be like, I don't understand what a story point is. Great, none of us do. That's kind of the point of story points. But we have some really great agile coaches also. And the biggest thing that I try to do, and I try to encourage other like senior engineers on the team, is as engineers, we don't tend to like process, right? We just want to write our code and like invent things and have fun, and process feels like boring overhead. I really try to impress upon people that the process is there. If they're created properly and utilized properly, they're there to actually help you work faster and to protect you from possible mistakes or mishaps. So one of the things that I really love about how we use Agile is our story pointing, coming up with our velocity and capacity, and teaching our engineers, like, this is exactly how you don't have to feel bad if you unexpectedly take 2 days off work. You can have a very data-driven conversation with your manager and with your product team on why you're not going to deliver the feature because you didn't plan on your dog getting sick and having to take 2 days off. And it doesn't mean you're going to work Saturday and Sunday. You know that your day is worth 3 story points, and now we're going to have to subtract 6 from this sprint. And now I've given you that information. You have to subtract 6 points from what I can do. You choose where on the board to take those 6 points off, but just know I'm not going to be able to do what I said I did. Sorry, my dog got sick.
Right on. And yeah, that's such a overwhelming feeling for so many people. It's like, I can't take days off. It's one of the traps of modern, most a lot of tech companies I've worked for in my life, unlimited PTO, which means don't take PTO.
Yeah, it really does.
Had a lot of communications about that. But yeah, that having a fact-driven conversation, I really like the way that sounds. And I'm sure people out there were going to take that as a good nugget from today's talks. We got more to talk about, but next question in the board is, what goals did you set up for yourself for your own assessment? Thanks, Josie, out there in Discord.
So I actually was just re-entering mine the other day. So as I said, distinguished engineer is often like, what does that even mean? And it means wildly different things at different companies. And so for me, one of my goals I am completing today, speaking here at GitKon, because one of my goals for myself is to get publications, do public speaking, actually get patents as well. So a lot of it is self-driven and what we would call externally peer-reviewed work. So that's the kind of goal I set for myself. I set a lot of goals for myself around mentoring other engineers. And then obviously goals related to what our organization is working on. And so, they change. A big one that I've set for myself this year is actually around diversity, equity, and inclusion training for my coworkers. As a lot of people might imagine, I am one of few Black female engineers just in the community and at my particular company. And so doing what I can to use my voice to make room for other people like me to get into the room, and reminding myself to get out of the way to give them that space. Yeah, and then like from a technical perspective, I'm really, really interested in making proof of concepts and documenting them well enough so that I can prove out that something works very quickly, but leave a nice breadcrumb trail for the people that are actually going to do it for production, which is an interesting talk kind of in and of itself that I've been thinking about, of like, how do you give people just enough so that they can have the fun of figuring it out on their own without making them like reinvent the wheel. So that's something I've been pondering lately.
That is definitely something in the development relations space we deal with constantly. I'm a developer evangelist, and I talk to a lot of DevRels in the world. And how do you make example code that doesn't just spoon feed you line by line? I've had that conversation with people like, okay, I got to the end of the tutorial. Now how do I use your product? We had that conversation like, well, that's what the tutorial is for. It's like, no, that's how I did this one thing with the tool. Like, how do I learn the rest of it? And that was eye-opening the first time I ever got that kind of feedback. So that's a very hard line to skate, and there's a lot of people out there facing it. I think we got time for a couple more questions here. Next one we had out from someone on Discord. I'm not going to try to pronounce that out loud. Did the metrics show a good average for code reviews between too long and too short?
Yes, I think they did actually. I was pleasantly surprised by our averages. While there were some that were under an hour, I think that's fine, again, because I have to account for how many of them were cherry picks, which I know everybody does them differently, but our cherry picks are usually like, hey, I cherry picked, can you approve it? Yeah, boom, boom. But then our next biggest bucket, and I kind of broke it into buckets. So I did like under an hour, and then I think I did like 1 to 4 hours, and then like 4 to 48 or 4 to 24. Anyway, our next biggest bucket was at around the 48-hour period, which I thought was really good. I think 2 days, again, because I didn't get rid of time when we weren't working, I think that shows that that's fast enough that we're getting things closed and through the pipeline, but shows that we're giving things enough time to have some healthy conversation and actually have eyes on each thing. So I felt pretty good about it. More than anything, I think just having the metrics allows you to have a healthy conversation, and that's what we did. Like, I didn't just look at this in a vacuum and decide, like, Leslie thinks this is healthy. I was able to take this back to all of the engineering managers, and we looked at it as a group and said, we think that's really healthy.
Right on. So the last question we had, I guess more of a comment, but we'd love to hear a little bit more, just for some fun to go out on here, is people love the cat paintings. I'm going to take myself out of the feed.
So this is my pandemic hobby. When the pandemic first started, I was watching too much television and probably had sometimes a little bit too much wine while drinking too much television. I said, I gotta do something more productive with my time, and I love cats. That's one of my cats right there. And so I started doing cat paintings. And I hope I didn't just lose you guys. No, oh, there we go. And so I started doing cat paintings in all different mediums. So some of them I painted, some are what's called diamond beading, and other ones are embroidered, and I'm always working on new ones. So this is the latest that I'm working on, a little cat mandala. And yeah.
That's a really awesome hobby. So is there any like final words? I know we kind of like went off sidetrack there, but any final words of wisdom, anything you want to share out with our GitKon audience?
Oh, no, thank you all for the awesome questions. And, you know, I think the biggest thing I would say is like, go play around with all the tools that we don't even know are there. Like, there's so many insights that you can grab from Git about yourself and about your organization. And I think we don't even realize a lot that there's all this data that you can mine, and it's just kind of fun to play around with.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
For being here. That was an awesome talk.
Great Q&A.
Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, guys.
Really awesome.
Take care, Leslie.
Have a great day.